Isn't it exciting to be here and listen to everyone's creativity journeys? Hasn't it been wonderful? You know, we're all on creativity journeys. However, a lot of people don't know they're on creativity journeys. And I would have to say for the first 25 years of my life, I didn't know I was on a creativity journey. So I kind of want to take you along on that creativity journey. My creativity journey actually spends a lot of its time in education. I am a teacher. I love being a teacher. I think it's the best profession in the world. I did a few other things along the way, and I always came back, and I love the fact of being a teacher. So you're going to get my creativity journey as I go through education. Here's where I started out, on a little farm near Duluth, Minnesota. And in fact, when I tell my students about it, I tell them, I know it sounds like I'm really old because I tell them I remember when we didn't have running water, I remember when we didn't have electricity, and then I tell them it's because we were 5 miles beyond the end of the line. So they understand I'm not that old. And so when I was young, one of the things I remember was, of course, we had a lot of different animals and playing with all those animals and taking care of them, playing hide and seek among the piles of grain and the piles of hay, because we made our own fun. And that's where my imagination started to get developed. Probably my most wonderful memory as a child would be the woods. I loved the woods. I would love wandering through the woods. That's where I would imagine. I would imagine life outside of our little farm. I would imagine what it would be like to go places and see things. And I really fell in love with nature. And it's really interesting because to this day, I'm still in love with nature. Now, I don't have my farm anymore, and my husband asks, why do I go out in the hot Texas heat to try to save a few shrubs? And I tell him, it's my farm. It's the only farm I have now in doing it. So it's during these kinds of things that my creativity journey started, and where I started to realize that nature was an important part of how I think. Now, along the way, I ended up in a place called California, the San Joaquin Valley. Now, my first teaching experience had been in a nice suburban school. And then I ended up in the San Joaquin Valley, and I was at a school that was 100% migrant children. And I try to explain to my students, if you've never been in a school with 100% migrant, it's called a school with high turnover. You know, when I was in Minnesota, I remember complaining when the third new student entered my classroom. It's kind of like God said, you think that's a lot? Let's show you turnover. Because the turnover in a migrant school will be 300 to 400%. Nobody that starts the year ends the year. And you only have a few days with each student. And it was in that particular setting that my creativity started to come to work for me, even though I didn't know what that was. One of the struggles I had is since I came from northern Minnesota and they were migrant children, they spoke Spanish and I spoke English. We did have a translator in the school, but I found out that it was very difficult for the children to try to remember what they were thinking long enough to get to the translator. So that's when I started to put into practice what I've now over the years called mind sketching. Mind sketching for us was making a little sketching of what your mind is seeing. So I'd ask the students, make a little sketch of what your mind is seeing. And then we will go find the translator, and the translator will help us know what it is, and then we can put the English words to it. And so that started to work so well that it just became part of my teaching. And I want you to know that little old mind sketching strategy has been used since. I've used it with struggling readers who don't understand that reading is not about words, it's about images. I teach mind sketching to my college students as a way to synthesize concepts and help them remember. And interestingly enough, in my current research, which is building verbal intelligence in children from generational poverty, mind sketching is a key tool we're using to build the complex language they need for academic achievement. Now, mind sketches are really quite simple. This would be one a student might give me that says, that helps me remember that a sentence has a subject and a verb. And when they get that image in their mind, it helps them remember instead of memorizing words. I use mind sketching in my vocabulary test. I would say to the students, I will give you the words. Please do not give me the memorized definition. That doesn't tell me you know it. Give me a mind sketch. So here's one of mine where the student gave me the sketch for temperate. They said this is high, this is midway, this is low, because I'm trying to show that temperate is midway between extremes. And so I started to learn the power of using the sketching and the mind sketching. But I still didn't understand that this was related to creativity. It was years later when I realized that being able to work with images, manipulate images, see images, is a key part of understanding creativity. So my journey led me back to Minnesota. And when I came back to Minnesota, I now encountered a principal who understood the power of creativity. And he did something for me I am forever grateful. He released in me my own creativity. And if I would have one wish for education today, it's that administrators would release the creativity inside of the teachers. It is there every time I go out there. It is there. The teachers are full of creativity, and I will tell them many times, I am fortunate. I got mine released. It's like the greatest natural resource available, and we make them hide it. Now, what did I learn from this principal? I learned that he was trying to show me what I should do with students. So then I realized my job was to go and release the creativity of my students. And he taught us that creativity could be formalized, that it wasn't just a happenstance the way I knew it, but there are strategies that I could use to help other students develop their creativity. One of those kinds of things was, think of many possibilities. I teach undergraduate classes in creativity today, and we use this little phrase all the time. There is always more than one right answer. That's right answer number 1. Give me right answer number 2. Give me right answer number 3. Give me right answer number 4. Give me right answer number 5. Now, how did that play out in my classroom? The first way it played out was very interesting. We would say to our students that we wanted them to generate ideas instead of us. It was as simple as the fact, I remember one of the teachers was trying to teach the children that when there are 2 vowels in a word, the first one says its name, the second one is quiet. So she didn't say to them, here's a list of words, let's go mark the vowels. She gave them a sheet of paper. And she said, I want you to make a simple mind sketch of a cake. And I want you to say the word cake. And when you hear the word cake, do you hear A like in cake? And they go, cake, A, cake, A. She said, here's your job. I want you to listen. And every time you hear someone say a word that you hear A like in cake, make a little sketch. And bring them all into class. I want to know what you have heard. And when the students came the next day and they started to share, and each one they would say A, and they'd share a word that they lake. She'd write the words on the board. Then she went up and circled some of those words, and she said, class, let me show you something about words. And she started to mark the vowels. And the students said, you know, when we use the teacher's words, it's supposed to work. But when you use our words and make it work, that's special. And so we learned every time we did something to gather the ideas from the students. Oh, yes, and then there was math. In the math class, I learned this from a teacher in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. By the way, you know, isn't there one thing nice about creative people? They always share. Have you noticed that? Isn't that neat about creative people? They don't say, it's my idea. Oh, if you take it, I'll never have another one. No, they're very sharing. And so he was telling me in his high school math class, his high school advanced placement, he said to me one day, you know, Joyce, I couldn't teach this if I didn't use creative thinking. Now, I thought, woo, listen up. Now, of course, the reason I listened up is I have to confess, when I got out of college, my first teaching job was first grade. Now, the reason I chose first grade was I figured the math wouldn't be above me. And so I was teaching first grade. So when he said, I go, oh, listen, come on with the math. He said, you know, you don't want students to just do the same problem over and over again. You want them to be able to do a problem several ways. He said, and then he showed me his math test. In that class, when you had a math test, you had 6 problems on the paper. And the instructions said, do each problem 5 ways and explain what you're doing. And I went, I can do that. So I marched on back to my classroom. And from then on, at least twice a week, math was called, you have a choice. Here's what I'd like you to do. See, problem number 7, 9, 11, 15, everybody do those. Pick 3 other problems and show me 3 ways to do them and explain what you're doing. So many types of possibilities. Then we learned about giving choice. Giving choice is a part of building creative thinking. Letting students be a part of their own decision making. You know, I find it interesting when I started to teach at the undergraduate level, I learned from those days, I still give my students a lot of choice. Sometimes they will write me a note at the end of the semester and say, Dr. J, thanks for letting us have choice. And I'm thinking, that should not be an unusual thing. That should be normal. And some of the choices along the way, one of the things that he taught us that I keep using was all of our students had a little paper every day. They made 4 boxes, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they would choose 4 things they were going to do when their work was done today. And they would choose them. Because one of the things I started to realize that was happening to creativity was teachers were trying to make all the choices for students. And they would make all these centers and all these activities. They would say, when you're done with your work, do this, do this, do this, do this. Our principal said, no, no, no. That's their time. They finished the work. Let them choose. And I started to realize when students know how to handle choice, you've opened a whole new door of opportunity within your classroom. And in fact, one day when I was in the middle of doing all of this, we had some people from Chicago visiting the classroom. And I remember Stephen saying, Mrs. Juntune, what are those people doing in the back of the room? I said, oh, Stephen, they're here to want to see how we think and make decisions. And he looks at me and he said, don't they think and make decisions in Chicago? Well, there are times I wonder about that, but that's okay. Then we looked at the fact of being original, being able to think differently from others. And so we're trying to encourage the students to go beyond the normal types of thoughts. One of the kinds of things I used to do with my students is I give them a wire ring about this big and round, and they had colored tape with their name around it, and we had a little hill behind our school. So we'd all come out to the end and stand right there, and at count of 3, everyone would throw out their ring and watch where it would land. Then I would say to them, now here's what I want you to do. Take your sheet of paper, and you have 2 columns. On the first column is, what things are inside your ring that other students will find inside of their ring? But then, what things inside your ring are special that nobody else will probably find inside of their ring? Now, what we were doing, we were getting the students to think beyond the first ideas, to think beyond the first answers, to be extra observant, to be push themselves in extra ways. And so that became part of how we help them think differently. Now, along the way during the formalized creative thinking, I started to look at what made the difference for me. And I realized, always and to this day, I'm triggered by everything in my environment. I also realized that humor and joy are a part of creative thinking. I mean, actually, when you think about it, that's why we hang out with creative people. They're more fun. A lot more fun. And And you can have more laughter in the classroom. I loved the day that we were getting ready to study birds. And so I started out and said to the students, okay, have you ever seen a bird? Do you know anything about a bird? Start listing some birds. So away they go, robin, bluebird, or they're making all these little sketches. When I asked them to share, I said, what birds do you know? Robin, blue jay, woodpecker, thunderbird. You know, and the students look at it, and I go, it works. You know? And so then they start to realize it's okay to have a deviation. It's okay, because actually what I would tell them, which is true, when you laugh at an idea, it jiggles the kaleidoscope of the mind, and the ideas fall down in a different pattern. Or I love the day we were looking at water. Where can we find water? Oh, in a river, in a lake, in an ocean. And the kid goes, in the dictionary. And the kids look at me. He said, it's there. You want me to find it for you? Yes, it is there. Now, one of the other things that I learned along the way that was very helpful in my creative journey was the principal who helped us understand we do not teach for today, we teach for the future. I remember the day he sat in the back of my classroom, and afterwards he said in his ever so gentle way, Joyce, you know what? These students are not all going to grow up to be teachers someday. Stop developing teachers. They're going to be everything. In fact, most of them won't be teachers. And so then we had a wonderful activity that we started to do in our school that helped me get my eyes on the right goal. And it's called What Year You're Teaching For. And he would tell us as a faculty, you know, you're not teaching for this year, you're not teaching for next year. What really matters is what are you teaching that will matter when they're 30. So we'd have to put down the number 30. From it, we had to subtract the average age of our students. Then we had to add that number to the year. And that was the year we were teaching for. Now I had to take that year and I said, oh my goodness, I'm not teaching for 2011. I'm teaching for 2032. Have you thought much about 2032? No. And if you're a teacher, all you're saying is, oh my goodness, when's the next meeting I have to be at, and when's the next deadline I have to make? And we totally forget what we're teaching for. And we would take that number and put on a nice sheet of paper and decorate it and put it where we could see it every single day. For me, it was my coat closet. And every morning as I hung my coat, I would say, what am I going to do today that will matter in the year 2032? Every day as I left, as I got in my car to go home, I said, what did I do today that will matter in the year 2032? Now, what that does is, yes, I taught the things that were short-term, but it also made sure every day that something I did was going to matter when they were 30. You know, it's not a mistake that Calvin Taylor from the University of Utah used to say, grades alone have zero correlation to success in life. It's not what you know that counts. It's what you do with what you know that makes a difference. And that's where creativity comes in. The whole using of all that information. And as I release it and let my students go, and even to this time, I'm undergraduates, my job still is to release their creativity and let them go. Now, Ritika talked about her challenges that she was in India. We give our students our challenges in our undergraduate classes. I have to tell you, we just finished the challenge on adding value because I want them to experience what it means to use creativity to add value. Part of what happens in college is they think everything they do is to eventually get a job and earn money. And I want them to realize that there's also a thing called adding value. In fact, I mess up the other one too, by the way, because I tell them really it's about following your heart. It's not the job other people think you should have. It's the job you want for you. But we did our value challenge. And so we just put in, our value challenge looks like this. I give them a little baggie with 10 cotton balls. And they have to decide how they can add value to someone's life with 10 cotton balls. Now, they have all kinds of planning time, but 1 hour to implement. And then they all send me the picture and send me the thing, and then in class I have all of them up on the PowerPoint ready to go. So then we get to go through, and each team gets to talk about what they did. A couple of them kind of always strike me every time that are interesting. I thought one of them was interesting this time because one of them did that whole trade-up type of thing. We want to see if we start with 10 cotton balls and we trade them, how far we can get within 1 hour. And actually, they made it all the way to a digital camera. And then they got the message of the class. They donated the visual camera to a local charity. And they said, Dr. J, we added value to the life of every single person that was in the trade, not just to one person. Of course, one of them that I love because they're on campus, which is interesting, are the students who took their 10 cotton balls and they created a smiling face on the front of a drinking fountain in one of our classroom buildings. And they said the reason they put that there was it's getting close to the first round of exams, and people are getting kind of nervous. And they said everyone needs a drink. So they figure every time they approach that fountain and see this little smiling face, they will smile and realize somebody was caring and thinking for them. And so when we look at these kinds of things, I look at the fact that I'm always using triggers from the environment. I'm looking at the fact that the humor, enjoying the humor. In fact, I will tell the students sometimes, oh, I really appreciated such and such an answer. You know, when you read 106 papers, it's really fun to read something interesting and funny. So then they go, do we have points for funny? Only if it matches the assignment. You know? And then we have the simmer effect, letting ideas sit and simmer and simmer and simmer. And it's out of those simmering things that the ahas come. I have to tell you this about a first grader. I was with some first graders one day, and in creativity, as you know, that little aha is what we look for. When does an idea pop through? And I said to the students, do you understand what an aha is? And the student raised their hand and goes, mm-hmm. An aha is when my mind gives me a surprise. Is that not the best definition for a creative idea popping through to do it? And so we let them simmer. And I would tell you this, in my simmering, I would wish that schools would, number one, get rid of the grading as far as first grade, second grade, third grade. Let people be where people need to be. Number two, release the teachers to let their creativity flow so that teachers can release the students to let their creativity flow. For years, I have lived by the paraphrase of Plato in every classroom, which is what you value, you will get. And it was a principal who said to me one time when I complained about my classroom, Joyce, guess what? You are getting a reflection of what they think you think is important. And you must constantly give them the message of what you think is important. Well, one day, a couple years ago, I came home from my class and opened my email. Dear Mrs. Juntune, my name is, and I was a student in your second grade class at Pike Lake Elementary in 1971. I know this may seem odd, but after speaking to some students the other day about pursuing a career in the fire service, I thought of you. I am currently a firefighter for Pierce County Fire District Number 8 in Edgewood, Washington. I was asked to speak to high school students about what it takes to become a firefighter, and one of the qualities I said was important was the ability to think creatively, to solve the many problems we are presented with on a daily basis. Of course, I thought of you and practicing brainstorming and creative thinking during all those grades in elementary school. I really feel those exercises and style of teaching helped me into my adult life and helped me to become a better firefighter. So thank you for your time at Pike Lake. I feel lucky to have had you as a teacher and nothing but pleasant memories of my time at Pike Lake. I want to remind us again, what you value, you will get. And as a teacher, overall, I value creative thinking. Thank you very much.
Dr. Juntune, I can see in my mind's eye when you were very young out in the countryside. I wonder if the lack of these modern technology distractions might have freed you to cultivate a very creative mind. And that brings me to think about today when so many young people spend so much time on Facebook or Twitter or some other social media. Are they actually denying themselves the ability to cultivate that creative mind?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why I go back and say, because there were no toys, because, and in fact, even when television came in, my parents said, no television till you all graduate, and so I didn't even know what was out there. And so that whole idea of playing in nature, creating your own entertainment, creating your own fun, absolutely. And in fact, I would tell you, one of the sad things my students tell me today is they do acknowledge the fact that they cannot cut off Facebook. They cannot cut off every little bleep that comes through on that phone. And when we are working in our creative thinking classes, our students struggle at the beginning. And it takes almost a semester before we can start to break through. And some do not break through, but others do break through. And when they break through, they tell us, oh my goodness, I can't believe how differently I think now. But I tell them it takes energy, takes effort, and takes time. You don't jump into the pool and arrive as a gold medal winner on the other side. You go practice every day, every day, every day. And so it is with creative thinking.
Now, as parents, if our own children are preoccupied with Facebook, Twitter, how do we begin to wean them off that?
And actually, it's almost like having creativity times. There's a parent I had in California I was teaching. I thought it was interesting. I mean, and that day had to do with their television. She said the television broke and she decided, I'm not going to get fixed for a month. I'm going to just see what they do. Well, for the first 5 days, I, Mom, please. And then afterwards, she said they started to pull out the crayons and the pencils and invent games and do all this. And when the month went by, no one even said they missed it. And so she didn't get it for a long time. But you know, there was that book written by that lady who was disconnected. Their whole family disconnected for like 6 weeks or whatever. And she tells about how different it was and how helpful it was that they disconnected. And I think learning how to disconnect is going to be the new creative challenge of the next generation.
Interesting. So another echo of taking things away to release or unleash creativity as opposed to adding stuff, adding funding, adding things to it. Very interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. Juntune. Pleasure seeing you again.